Welcome to our webinar. What a wonderful way to highlight National Adoption Month by presenting Talking with Young People in Foster Care about adoption. So we've got some great presenters today. Thank you for joining us. If you haven't already done so, click on that link there on the center of your slide for handouts. That'll give you some of the handouts our presenters will be talking about, as well as the slide material. Give you a moment to do that. Okay, just a quick note about the webinar. It was developed through funding from the North Carolina Division of Social Services by the Family and Children's Resource Program, part of the Jordan Institute for Families here at UNC Chapel Hill School of Social Work. The webinar is being recorded and will be available soon on NCSW Learn. Just a quick announcement here, another way to promote a webinar coming up in a month. So the beginning of October, the Division of Social Services had released an updated version of the Diligent Recruitment and Retention Data Profile, the program planning tool. This is part of our state's new Diligent Recruitment and Retention Plan. And though completed data profiles aren't due until August 1st, 2019, the Division is encouraging agencies to start reviewing relevant data and building their capacity now. So to assist them, this webinar is going to explore the new version of the data profile, review what's expected of agencies, provide practical examples for agencies of all sizes on obtaining and using data to inform recruitment and retention of resource families for children in foster care. So information, resources, and strategies outlined in this webinar directly support efforts to achieve timely permanence and other outcomes we seek for children and families. Targeted audience will be child welfare professionals for county DSS and child placing agencies. And our presenters will be the Division of Social Services, Jamie Bazemore, which is part of the Adoption Services team, and Lane Destro, a child welfare data analyst at the division. You must pre-register for this webinar no later than November 30th, 2017. Of course, you can do that by going to NCSW Learn. You'll see an announcement for the webinar and registration instructions there. So here are our goals for the webinar. By the end of the webinar, we hope you learn about some child-focused adoption preparation activities being used here in North Carolina, some specific strategies you could try with youth who say they don't want to be adopted, and resources for learning more. Communicating with us. Many of you have already found the chat box there at the bottom of your screen. You'll see there are a couple options. You can send a message to everyone, or you can send a message to us, the hosts, meaning here at UNC. This will be the primary way that you guys can communicate with us. So certainly use the chat box to send in questions or comments throughout the presentation. As you might notice, it can move pretty quickly, but we do have someone keeping track of your questions, and we'll look for opportunities to answer those during the presentation. Speaking about questions, since this is just a 90-minute webinar, and we've got a lot of great information to share, we may not likely get to every single question, but we'll do our best. We do develop a follow-up document that answers questions asked during the webinar, and then certainly could be inclusive of questions we may not have had time for. So this document, the follow-up document, will be emailed to all registered participants, as well as it will be posted with the webinar recording in the near future. Again, the webinar recording will be available on NCSW Learn and on our Family and Children's Resource Program webpage at the link you see there on the slide. So encourage others that were unable to attend today to review the recording. All right, here is another way you guys can communicate with us. Use the icons. So you'll see at the top, you'll see a guy with his hand raised. You can use that icon to drop down to tell us, for example, speak up or slow down. And just to practice this, as we often do, it helps to know if we have some folks out there participating as a group. So if you are participating as a group this morning, use the raise hand icon to let us know. Give you a moment to do that. If you're participating as a group, use the raise hand icon. Great, it looks like we have a few groups participating, several actually, as you guys are raising your hand, they're coming in. Thank you, that helps us too when we need to pause and look for opportunities for questions. You might be gathering in a room full of folks. All right, again, I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar. I'm Rick Zeckman with the Jordan Institute for Families, our Family and Children's Resource Program. We have technical help from our colleagues Philip Armfield and John McMahon. Just to give you a snapshot of the attendees registered, we have over 200 people registered representing 61 counties. We also have division staff and private child placing agencies registered, so thank you all for joining us. And let me allow our presenters to introduce themselves, starting with Brandon. So Brandon, just go ahead and unmute yourself and say hello.
Hello everyone, my name is Brandon Nivens. My name is Brandon Nivens, and I will be talking with you all today about why adoption matters.
Thank you, Brandon. Mary, can you jump on the mic, introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I am Mary Mackins. I am one of the 4 NC Kids consultants with the division. I have been with the division now for about 7 or 8 months. Previously, I was with Wake County for a few years in the adoption unit. And then before that, I have about 12 years in the private sector in a variety of programs, such as adoptions and supervising an independent living program and foster care.
Thank you very much, Mary. Diane, can you unmute yourself, jump on the mic, and
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am Diane Delafield. I am the Executive Director of Under One Sky Village Foundation, and know many of you from 20 years ago in 1996 when I started Campaigns for Kids. So I've had experience developing adoption and foster care recruitment campaigns for about 50 agencies in this state. And in the process, actually adopted a 15-year-old who is now 30, and started our camp-based program for adoptions in 2004. So happy to be speaking today based on that experience.
Great, and happy to have you here. Last but not least, we have Bobbette Willis. Bobbette, can you unmute yourself and jump on the mic, introduce yourself?
Good morning. I'm Bobbette Willis, Adoption Supervisor with Mecklenburg County Youth and Family Services. I've been with Mecklenburg County for the past 4 years. Prior to, I worked in other child welfare service areas as well as in mental health. So I'm excited to be with you guys on today.
Thanks, Bobbette. And just thanks to all of our presenters for making themselves available today. I think you guys are going to really enjoy the information they have to present. You will get their contact information at the end of the webinar as well if you guys wanted to send them a thank you note or just had another quick question to follow up with. So here's our agenda today. We're going to spend the remainder of our 90 minutes together talking about why adoption preparation matters. We get some examples of agency success, what strategies they've implemented to support youth, some strategies that workers can implement to support youth. We'll share some resources for further learning and have time for question and answer at the end. So to begin our presentation today, Brandon Nivens is going to jump back on the mic as a former foster youth that was adopted as a teenager. He's going to share some of his experience and perspective about why adoption preparation matters. Brandon, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Good morning, you all. As Rick mentioned, and as I did not mention while I was introducing myself, I apologize about that. I used to be in foster care. I entered the system when I was 12 years old. I was in the system until I was 16 when I was adopted. I went through many homes. I was in about 11 placements when I was in the system, and pretty much immediately after I got into the system, we realized that reunification wasn't really a part of my track, and I was asked if I wanted to be adopted. My initial reaction, and I think most youth that go into foster care, their initial reaction is probably going to be no. There's many factors that weigh into this, and why young people say no immediately to adoption. And I think that it's probably due to a lot of attachment to their birth family. I lived with my grandmother when I was not in the system, and she was very dear to me, and it was always my goal to go back and live in the home with her. And I think that most youth that are in foster care, it's very hard to turn off the attachment that they have to their birth family, even though there may have been abuse or neglect throughout their lives. They really just want to get back to their homes and the families that they were taken away from. So that those hopes of reunification really just make their initial answer no to adoption, because they want to go back home. I think that I initially also said no because I really didn't understand what adoption meant. And most youth are probably going to be like that as well. They have lots of questions. They have lots of hesitations about getting started in the adoption process. And any question or fear that they have or concerns that go unanswered, I mean, it's usually going to deter a child from saying yes to adoption. And a lot of people don't really take the time to sit down and talk with them and explain really what adoption is and what it means. I know a big part for me when I was going through the system is I always felt like there was chance for rejection. I lived with my grandmother, like I said, and I was already taken away from that home and stripped from the family that I had known. So just adding a whole new element or a new family in there that could possibly reject you, where you could leave their home as well, that just plays a huge part in why I think youth say no to adoption. They've already gotten all this stuff going on in their lives, and they don't want to be rejected by people, or they probably don't want to get into a family that they have to reject either, because they're not really comfortable living there. And also a big part is getting out of the system plays a huge role in a lot of youth's lives. And when they're in the system, they really just want to be out. They don't want social workers and guardian ad litems and all these people, in figures of authority telling them what to do, where they can live, and setting the rules that they have. And immediately it just becomes a big thing when they get into care, saying, I want to get out of the system. I want to be on my own. I want to go back to my birth family. And I think that plays a huge role in why youth say no to adoption, because they fear that if they do get adopted, they're tied into that family, and they're kind of tied into care, and they won't be able to get out. Under One Sky is an organization that Diane is going to speak on, a little bit later, and give you all some information about that. But Under One Sky really is the reason that I got adopted, and they're an organization that really actually helped me come to terms with saying yes to adoption. My social worker contacted Under One Sky to help because my initial reaction was no. And they came into my life and really made adoption about me, turned it around, and instead of me having all these fears and concerns and reasons to say no to it, they gave me all the reasons why I should say yes, and they made me fully involved with the adoption process, which was new at the time for me, because you're in foster care and you're going through all these homes and social workers, and it doesn't really feel like it's about you. And so they were able to make a video with me. They were able to make a zine, which you can see. And, I was able to, just write some stuff about myself, and that I wanted to be a math and music teacher and play baseball. And it really allowed families to see, my dislikes and my likes and what I enjoyed, and it really made conversations when I met with the family so much more deep and valuable, because they already knew a little about me, and they got to watch a video that I helped produce. Under One Sky came to my placement at the time, and let me pick where I wanted to be shot, and the pictures that I wanted to take, and the things that I wanted to say. And I was fully involved with the adoption process. And thanks to that, my mom actually went to one of the events and saw all this stuff, that I had produced and was, a part of making. And, that was really what caught her eye and, made her interested in me. So thanks to this program, and thanks to the way that they went about, letting me be involved in this process, I was able to be adopted at age 16.
Thank you, Brandon. We're going to hear more from Brandon a little bit later, but what a really neat personalization. I love that slide with a picture of you. All right, so now we're going to hear from Mary Mackins as she shares some data regarding how many children are free for adoption, as well as some of the barriers she hears at the state level in regards to the perceptions about why youth are not adoptable. And just a reminder, if you guys have any questions as you're listening to Mary, please go ahead and type them in the chat box, and we'll try and track those and answer them along the way. Thanks.
Thank you, Rick. Okay, so we want to start by taking a quick glance at some data. I do have a couple disclaimers that I want to put out there before we look at these. First, I want to say that our data is just as good as what we put into it, meaning there's always room for human error, and if we're not updating our 5094s, the numbers aren't going to reflect. It would be completely accurate. And I also want to state that the pilot counties for NC FAST began transitioning back in August. The data for those counties are not represented in the figures, so the numbers are probably a little bit higher than what is shown here. So at the end of September, we had 10,300 children in foster care, and of those 10,000, we had over 2,400 in the age range of 13 to 17. Over 1,100 children are currently legally free for adoption, and of those 1,100, we have 280 that are from the ages of 13 to 17. And at the end of the fiscal year, June of 2017, we had over 500 teenagers age out of the system. Okay, so now we want to take a look at what we hear when we're discussing recruitment of teens. The first is that the youth isn't ready to be adopted, or that the youth isn't adoptable. No child is unadoptable. We really want to move away from this mentality and know that the right family is out there for every child, and we just have to find that family. It's often suggested that because a youth may be in a residential facility or has not processed the concept of adoption, that recruitment can't begin. Both of these things are okay, and they can be addressed with any interested families that come forward. We can share with the families that the road to adoption might take a little bit longer because the youth is preparing or digesting the idea of adoption. But if we wait, we could lose 6 months to a year in recruitment time. So we really want to start the process and just be transparent throughout and just let the families know. And they can come and they can be part of it, be part of the process. Also, taking the children's comments at face value. To reiterate a little bit what Brandon touched on, a lot of our kids up front say that they don't want to be adopted. This can be because they don't want to admit that they're scared, or that they feel like they're going to lose their birth family connections. But most of our adopted families recognize that maintaining healthy birth family connections is very important in the youth being successful and having a smooth transition through adoption. But also these connections can be a support to the adoptive families. We just got to take a step back and just look at the messaging that we're giving to the families and to the youth. We always want to validate what the youth are feeling, but we also want to start that conversation about adoption and what adoption can bring to them, that they don't have to lose their birth family connections. I think the one thing, and I think Brandon said this as well, is getting the youth involved, having them a part of the process and being an active member in the search for their forever family. It's not our forever family, it's their forever family. So that might help with some of that anxiety. The youth is too old. We often hear that he or she is 17 and they feel they're too old for adoption. But permanency can mean and look very different for every youth that's in care. Our recruitment processes can bring families forward that can act as visitation resources. They can be mentors, supports that they can turn to when they turn 18, and just having lifelong connections that they might not otherwise have. Let's take a minute and just remember the days when we were a young adult, discovering the world around us, and think about how hard it would have been if we didn't have a family or someone there to support or lean on. How many of us were truly on our own at that time with no financial, emotional, or physical support? I read an article recently that stated 70% of adults ages 18 to 21, that's 75%, rely on their parents to assist them in some capacity, whether it be financial, physical, or emotional. And then they also just want to be able to share the good, the bad, and the indifferent, sharing those moments like a first job, graduation, holidays, or special times. So we just really need to take the time to communicate with the youth the benefits of having those lifelong connections and having those supports behind us. Okay. Also, it can be difficult to recruit families when the worker and the youth are extremely specific in what they're looking for or what their ideal family is. We need to start looking at opening up the dialogue regarding all the families that are out there that may not look or act exactly like what we envision as the ideal or perfect family. Just exploring the differences and the strengths of various families and how those strengths can build a great family. We don't all have to look the same. We don't all have to act the same, but we can still build a family and a great family. You look at what the family enjoys. Do they share similar interests? Do they like the same foods, music, community events? We have youth that specify they want to live in a big city or they want to live in the country. So taking all those things into account and not just what we vision as the ideal family. I don't think any of us have a perfect family, so we shouldn't expect a perfect family to step up. We just want the right family. It doesn't have to be the perfect family. We just want the right loving family that will nurture and love the kids. And finally, the one that we hear so often is the youth doesn't want to move. We understand that change is scary and moving on top of a new family can exacerbate those feelings, but we really need to help these youth process those feelings and what could be of that move, what could come of that move. I think the bottom line most of the time when it comes to not wanting to move out of area is losing those birth family connections. But with technology today, I mean, we have, I think, FaceTime, Twitter, Instagram. I don't know them all, but there's certainly those ways of keeping connections. And again, many of our families that are willing to adopt are willing to keep those connections intact and even willing to do periodic visits with families. But we need to have these conversations and explore options without discounting a family just simply because they're out of state. And keep in mind that per policy, we cannot delay permanency for a child just because the family resides out of state. I've had many workers tell me, well, I thought the Jones family was a perfect match, but I know Johnny won't look at them because they live in another state. And I think not to stop the conversation there, to keep it going, explore with the youth the similarities, the strengths, the reasons you think this family could be a good match. And it doesn't have to happen overnight. We can take time and have the youth process the move and the transition, and just being able to explore those different concepts with them and open up their options. So just having those discussions will increase the likelihood of more youth being adopted. And I think it's so important just to keep in mind that we all want to have strong relationships and we want to have connections and a sense of belonging.
Great. Thank you very much, Mary, for setting the stage with the data and some of those barriers that you hear at the state level. Bobbette Willis is going to jump on the mic, and she's going to share some successful strategies that Mecklenburg DSS has implemented to support foster youth in their transition to adoption. Bobbette?
Good morning, everyone. So Mecklenburg County has two unique programs that we consider outside of the box that has yielded positive outcomes. The first program is Just About Me. We call it JAM for short, which is an adoption readiness program. This program was initially created for older youth who were in foster care as a way of letting them know that they were not alone in this adoption journey. The goal was for youth ages 12 to 17 to meet as a means of a support group. As time progressed, the youth started sharing more complex issues, sharing that they had different feelings and they were facing different issues with adoptions. And the social workers felt a need to have a more structured program that would support the youth. So the team was able to find the 357 model by Dr. Darla Henry that would provide clear and consistent exercises on addressing youth who are in foster care and awaiting adoption. Mecklenburg County contracted with Dr. Henry for a 2-day training for the social workers, and the 357 model also offers a monthly consultation in which we discuss cases that need additional attention, our youth who need a little push, and our social workers who need guidance on how to help our youth as they struggle or are progressing through adoption. The social workers complete an activity with the youth, one of the 357 model activities monthly during the youth visit, at their monthly visit, and then a quarterly group session or support group activity is held for the youth that are facilitated by the adoption social workers. This slide is an example of our Getting to Know You activity in which the social workers put a modern spin on it using some of the Snapchat filters. The social workers gathered photos that we have taken of the youth at multiple events and brought those pictures of the youth to the activity. And the youth were able to use the pictures to complete the 357 exercise, in which it asks specific questions such as your favorite holiday, your favorite animal, places you would like to visit, your favorite family memory. And the youth and the social worker put together this board. The youth completed the activity in a small group and then shared it with the larger group. The youth had an opportunity to take this home with them, which is also used as a modern spin to their life book and keepsake. And it also gives the youth an opportunity to, when they share the information with the group, it gives them an opportunity to work on their public speaking skills and learn to advocate for themselves. The overall goal for JAM is for the youth to feel supported while they're awaiting adoption and to learn the skills needed to find their own voice. We realize that our youth are their biggest advocate. They can speak for themselves, especially our teens, and we want to empower and equip them to be able to speak with prospective adoptive families and share their dreams, their goals, and their desires for their future. The second unique program that Mecklenburg County Adoptions Department utilizes is the annual Youth Adoption Conference. The Youth Adoption Conference is a yearly conference held in Charlotte where nationally recognized keynote speakers, panelists from foster care and previous adoptees, and adoption professionals share their adoption experience or areas of expertise. The conference is open to all North Carolina foster care youth ages 10 to 17 with the primary or secondary goal of adoption. Again, this conference is open for all North Carolina youth with the primary or secondary goal of adoption, ages 10 to 17. The registration is free, and it also includes a breakfast, lunch, all of the workshops, a conference bag, and prizes. Previous speakers for this conference have been Morris Morrison and Willie Moore Jr. Last year, we had about 100 youth attend the conference, and we know that we have more than 100 youth with a goal of adoption in North Carolina. So we are asking that all of our attendees start marking their calendars now. The 4th Annual Youth Adoption Conference will be held June 20th, 2018 at Central Piedmont Community College, the Harris campus, which is located in Charlotte, North Carolina. A new program Mecklenburg County implemented in October is called Weekend Miracles. Weekend Miracles is a program that was modeled from the Kids Safe program in Los Angeles County, California. Mecklenburg County has collaborated with Congregations for Kids, which is a network of churches in Mecklenburg County, to recruit mentors for our youth in foster care. The goal is to create a lasting connection for youth in foster care ages 9 to 17, and giving them an opportunity to be matched with adults who are willing to host or mentor those youth. Again, the criteria for this program are youth ages 9 to 17 with a goal other than reunification, who agrees and volunteers to participate. And this is a program that the youth has to say they're willing to participate in. The criteria for the adults is, of course, they have to attend an orientation and some additional trainings to equip them and prepare them to work with our youth. The goal is to create a mentoring or hosting relationship in which the volunteer would do 2 activities a month with a youth in foster care for at least a minimum of 1 year. Of course, we hope that expands to more than 1 year, but what we know and what the research shows from California is that these relationships have opened the door to adoption, that adults who have been scared to potentially foster or adopt, that once they meet the children in a structured activity, are able to build and grow relationships, and those relationships then develop to adoption. As you can see here, this is an example of our most recent activity held October 21st. The way Weekend Miracles work is that there's a structured monthly activity for the mentors to come and meet the youth. And once the youth and the mentors become matched in that they've both selected to enter a matching or mentoring relationship, then they're able to do activities outside of our structured monthly activities. The mentors then become a part of the youth treatment team. And of course, we've completed all of the background checks, training, home assessments, to ensure that the adults have met the criteria. And what the research has shown in California and what we know and believe will happen in Mecklenburg County is that our youth will have long-lasting adult connections. As Mary stated earlier, that youth, once they turn 18, still definitely need someone in their life to be a support and that they can turn to. And these adult connections, we know will be lifelong for our kids, as well as potentially lead to ongoing relationships. And as you can see, this was a fall festival. Our youth were doing some pumpkin decorating along with some of the mentors who were there to meet our youth. And we're really excited to have this program in Mecklenburg County. I do see that we have one question about the Youth Adoption Conference as far as the youth attending the conference that were outside of Mecklenburg County. The majority of the children who attended the conference, we had about 100 kids. About 70 of those youth were from Mecklenburg County, so only about 30 from outside counties. So we are asking that the counties that are on the conference call would start preparing now to get your youth to our Youth Adoption Conference. Information about registration will be shared at a later date on our website, but we do anticipate having this we are having this conference, and we would love to see all of the youth from North Carolina ages 10 to 17 with a primary or secondary goal of adoption attend that conference. I would like to give a huge thank you and shout out to the social workers of Mecklenburg County. They're very hardworking and dedicated social workers who plan all of these activities and events on top of carrying their normal adoption caseload. They have shown true compassion in planning and executing these activities, and this work could not be done without their commitment to the youth of Mecklenburg County. And also want to say thank you to our senior manager, Tamara Nelson, who advocates tirelessly for our program and to get us the services needed to meet the needs of the youth in Mecklenburg County.
Thank you, Bobbette. And it looks like you have a tremendous amount of interest in the conference, and reasonably so. I couldn't believe it either that it was a free conference available to all youth in North Carolina. In fact, here's some more questions coming in too, looking at capacity of really, I guess, how many can attend. I know you said last year, I think there was 100 youth that had attended, but what point do you max out? Are you full? That's what where the questions are going at now. Can you?
For this year's conference, we are anticipating about 250. So the registration will be open to the first 250 youth who register for the adoption conference.
And there's another question I think I can answer. It was asking for where it was specifically again, and you had said it was the campus of the Central Piedmont Community College. That's the Harris campus in Charlotte, for those that you were interested. Okay, so in addition to some of the strategies that Bobbette had shared that they're doing in Mecklenburg DSS, we also have Diane Delafield, and she's going to talk more about some successful strategies that Under One Sky has implemented to support foster youth in their transition to adoption. And while she's talking, again, keep in mind, if you have questions about any of this information, feel free to just type it in the chat box, and we'll try and jump on the mic and answer those. Thanks.
Good morning again, and just wanted to give you a brief overview of Under One Sky. It grew out of a program that I started in 1996 called Campaigns for Kids. In that program, we developed adoption and foster care recruitment campaigns across the state for public and private agencies to really help raise awareness of the need to adopt and foster older kids. And out of that grew Under One Sky camp-based programs, and today we describe ourselves as a mentoring community of peers and adults for youth in foster care. We work with young people in foster care between the ages of 7 to 26, or for as long as they need us, and most of our work now is through camp-based programs. We are based in Asheville, but we serve all counties in North Carolina, and we've been providing adoption preparation programs and recruitment services to more than 400 children in our state. In 2004, we began an adoption preparation camp-based program through a federal grant. And they wanted to see what we could do, since this program was innovative, if we took teenagers and brought them together from across the state and gave them a camp-based experience that would continue throughout the year. So initially, kids would come together. They came together for a week and then 3 weekends throughout the year. And what we have learned is that not only were they able to get ready and prepare for adoption, they were able to find families, retain those families, and beyond that, community. And Brandon is a perfect example. At 26 years old, I met Brandon when he was 14 and has grown up in our program and actually is now on staff. So today we serve about 10 counties, and just briefly, the Journey experience is what began in 2004. And we're in our 14th year. It's a self-discovery camp-based program for young people 11 to 17. It includes a couple weekends and a week-long camp experience, and it's the same group that goes through the entire year. So we help prepare them for adoption or a new foster family, reunification, or if they're leaving foster care, whatever the next step may be. And we do this through interesting self-discovery programs like carpentry, music, dance. We've had Tai Chi. And then the most important aspect, I think, is through small group discussions. So they really get to know each other. And the Junior Journey experience is based on the same model, but younger kids, 7 to 11. We introduced Total Life conferences several years ago, and this is for the older group, 16 or 15 to 18 years old, to really help prepare them for leaving foster care by providing life and work skill building workshops. And then Second Wind is a leadership mentoring program for some of our older youth, and they travel and provide workshops to GALs and social workers, foster families, adoptive families. So from their own perspective, talk about attributes, what makes a good foster parent, a GAL, social worker, and then they support each other in the process. And then in between camps, we have 2 social workers, one in the Piedmont area, one in Western North Carolina, and we provide year-round support services between camps to all of our kids. So one thing I've learned about preparing children for adoption, it's best for them and for social workers to do this in small groups rather than individually, which I will explain as I introduce you to a program that we started in 2014, and we have found to be very successful in helping children get ready for adoption, and this is called Journey Club. So Journey Club is an adoption support group. These are for youth between the ages of 11 and 17 who are going through the adoption process, and we stay with them from the very beginning once they've been identified and they're on adoption track, through identifying a family, recruitment, and then once as they post-adopt services once they enter into a new family. The groups meet monthly for 6 3-hour sessions. And I know that this is a time commitment, but we found that it was well worth it, that this group experience really creates a safe container to address issues and barriers that often hold children back from moving forward with adoption. They develop friendships and trust, and we have found often a willingness to share deeply so that you can really get underneath what the real issues are. And that's one of the big benefits from bringing a group together rather than doing this one-on-one social worker to child who's on adoption track. The other is that we've learned that they often provide amazing and valuable support to each other in the group. So sometimes as adults we can just kind of sit back and hold the container, and they help problem solve and often help each other, cross that hurdle from being afraid to go forward with adoption to saying yes with adoption. And in one case, we actually had a sister and a brother, Haley and Jason. These are not their real names, but Jason found an adoptive family. Haley did not. They only wanted Jason in their family. And so both of these kids were part of our adoption support group. And as they went through it together, Haley was able to finally say to her brother, I really want you to have this for yourself. And he was able to accept that and move forward with adoption. And their biggest fear was not being able to see each other. And since that time, that they have been able to see each other. So that is often one of the fears that holds kids back from saying yes. So the group sessions are 3 hours midweek from 4:30 to 7:30. I think our biggest issue is transportation. Social workers would bring the kids to a central location. We learned that kids are much more responsive and engaged once they've eaten and they've had time together having fun. So, for example, we met at the Nature Center in Asheville and had some fun together for about 30, 45 minutes, and then went to a staff person's home and actually had a meal together, and then a really dynamic dialogue for about 60 minutes. And some of the topics included misconceptions and fears about adoption. We invited adoptive parents and kids who have been adopted to come to the group and talk from their perspective what it's like. And some of the questions we talked about was, how do you know if it's the right family for me? You know, what's the reality of being in a family, and ways to look at having an adoptive family while maintaining birth family connections. So they were lively discussions, and like I said before, they really helped each other. So facilitators can include an adoptive parent and a young adult who's been adopted. I really think it's best to have a facilitator that isn't the youth social worker, because often kids hold back and they say things that they think you want them to say rather than what's really on their mind.
Can we pause for just a moment here, Diane? As you got a couple questions that are rolling in, and I don't want to lose track of them because some of them were based on what you're just talking about. So there was one question came in, is this a faith-based program? And that was when you were talking about the Journey Club, but I don't know if that was more overarching to the services in general provided by Under One Sky. Can you address that?
I sure can. It's not faith-based. So, however, we also describe ourselves as a spiritual community in that so many of our young people are hungering for a connection to something that's bigger than they are. And so we are there, and we can do this because we're with them during these camp programs to really help them on that, what we would call a spiritual journey. And but we are not faith-based, so we're open to any denomination or any young person who would like to be part of our program. And so I also want to say, so Sunday mornings, we call it Sunday Celebration. And this is a celebration of our lives and creation and all of us being together in community rather than based on a single denomination.
Thanks. There's a couple more coming in, and they may be kind of interrelated, because earlier on in your presentation, you were given an overview and you mentioned working with 10 counties. And the question was, what are those counties that you're working with? But there's other questions kind of related that make me lead to wondering how folks can access your services. Like, for example, there's one person asking, what's the cost of your services? Can you address just how folks access services, who you're working with?
Sure. Right now, we're working with Lee County, Lincoln, Mecklenburg, Catawba, Union, and then counties in western North Carolina that include a large population from Buncombe and Henderson. And there are other counties, but they don't come to mind right away. We've served kids from Gaston County as well. So I think, so the best way to get in touch would be our youth services directors. One is in Mecklenburg and one is in the Asheville area. And I will say the majority of the young people we serve are from the Piedmont area west, because they can utilize a lot of support services between camps. It's harder to do that with counties that are farther away. We call it a journey experience. The cost is $3,300 for a year per youth, and this involves them in all of the camp-based programs. That's 2 weekends a year, plus a week-long camp, plus they can participate in Journey Club, which is the adoption support program, support services during the year, and we are serious about that. We provide very specialized individual need or services to these young people. So, for example, if one young person was found an adoptive parent through our program and went to live with them, was challenged by being in that family. And so we went out on gosh, on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, and really provided individual support to this family. So yeah, does that answer that question?
Well, there was another one that was coming in general of how do we get linked into the service if we're not one of those counties that you mentioned.
In terms of the Journey Club, what part of what we do is come to the county and actually help you get a Journey Club or an adoption support group together through consultation, through actually mentorship as you get that program going. So we are very happy to do that.
Great. I think we might have addressed them for now. Certainly we'll look back at the questions as they're coming in. We'll continue to track those. Please do continue to type in your questions in the chat box if we haven't thoroughly answered them. And of course, again, we can provide you all the presenters' contact information. So if you wanted to reach out to Diane later, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer questions about access to services.
I would be happy to, absolutely. So moving forward with recruitment, I'd like to talk about recruitment, adoption recruitment, and I personally have always considered it a privilege to help children find adoptive families. It's been my mission and my passion for the past 20 years, and I think one of the most important things I've learned is that there really is a family for every child, and it's up to us to act on that belief. And sometimes I know myself that we can put limits on what's possible. But I've seen an 18-year-old get adopted who came to an interview with me wanting to help other kids get adopted, believing she was too old. And during that process of the interview realized because she was going off to college, she would not have a family or any place to go during holiday vacations. So we talked a little bit more about that. And she told me about her best friend and her best friend's mother. And the long story short is that when her best friend's mom found out that she wanted to be adopted because she didn't, she adopted her. And so oftentimes I think we can hold kids back because we are, for confidentiality reasons, or we may have judged or labeled that she's 17, soon to be 18, and so we sometimes answer the question for them, and I've learned not to do that. I've also learned, as Brandon and others have said, Mary, that it's really important to involve kids in their own recruitment process. And oh my gosh, how much more rich, it's really rich to do that, and a lot of fun when you are making this a co-creative event and not trying to think about what it is you'd like to do for them, but to really make them part of the process. And I think the other piece that I keep hearing from young people is that to keep them updated and to really share what's going on. They really want to have a measure of control over what's happening in their lives. And this is including what happens with recruitment efforts and court dates and permanency planning meetings, and if a family has shown interest, how that family is doing as they move through the adoption process. And I think that explaining the process and helping prepare these kids for all potential outcomes initially is important. It's important to have a game plan so that all of these different outcomes are discussed ahead of the adoption recruitment process. So, for example, if parents change their minds or no one shows interest, after a particular event, then you've already talked about this, and you've talked about this potential situation, and it normalizes it. And then last, that youth don't need to be present at recruitment events. We started Village Adoption Connection back in 2004, and actually NC Kids was part of this as well. And our theory was, and it worked, that they didn't need to be present at their adoption event. And so they developed their own video and their mini profile. You saw Brandon's, their own profile in a mini magazine, which you saw Brandon's mini magazine. And then they would select people to attend on their behalf who could share strength-based stories about them. And so we formed individual storytelling circles for each of these young people. Typically, we would feature 5 to 7 at an event. And these storytelling circles included the social worker, the people that the children chose to attend the event, and prospective families. So this way, prospective families could see the materials the youth developed, their video, their mini magazine. They could hear stories from various perspectives, not just the social workers, on what this young person is like. And the social worker was there and could listen to the types of questions and comments prospective families were asking and sharing. And we've had great success with this model. Again, it's time consuming, but it's well worth it. And this was the model that was developed during our grant, and we were actually able to surpass the goal that we had in terms of finding adoptive families for teenagers. And then I guess the last really is to prepare a strength-based profile that's current, and I'm sure most of you are doing this, but really giving potential families information incrementally rather than all at once. Meeting a family for the first time, I believe, does not need to know everything that's happened in this child's history, but once they show interest and more interest, to give them more and more information. And we've even asked youth to help us develop their own profile based on their interests and their strengths and their dreams for the future. And that has made a huge difference, and adding a lot of really fun photographs. So that's been my experience.
Thank you very much, Diane. So Diane and Bobbette had shared some agency strategies to support adoption. And now we're going to move to those individual worker strategies that we can do. And we're going to hear again from Brandon about his experiences of how a worker supported him. And then Diane will jump on and share some strategies too to support workers so that they can support youth. Brandon?
Thanks, Rick. I was lucky enough to have excellent workers, foster parents, and mentors throughout my foster care experience. They were all very skilled in communication and really showed an interest in my success and well-being. And I think that was the biggest helpful thing for me as I went through the system. When you're in foster care and you've been taken away from your family, you normally switch schools and had to make new friends and be put in a home that you've never lived in before. Those are very stressful situations to be in, and having someone that is communicating with you fully and really interested in guiding you along the way and letting you be a part of the process, it's very helpful, and it adds so much to the child's life in a time where they don't really have control over most things, and it at least allows them to be a part of the process a little bit, and to have a knowledge of what's going to be happening to them, because it is their lives. In my opinion, the best thing a social worker ever did for me was just to keep me updated and in the loop, show an interest in the things that I like, and let me speak my mind, and try to give my opinion for where I may want to go next, or what I may want to do next with my life, and just give me some support for that. Youth are simply just trying to live life, and it's already a life that's been turned upside down for them, and they deserve to be decision makers. They deserve to have a voice, and for that voice to be heard and appreciated, and they deserve to be front seat drivers when it comes to their care.
I think the other, in terms of supporting social workers, that I keep hearing is, to make sure they have the resources and the tools that they need. Not every social worker is necessarily trained in adoption recruitment. So including trainings and workshops including trainings and workshops for someone to help develop the video or the mini magazine or profile. The other is to giving social workers the time they need to support these young people. It takes time to check in with youth on a regular basis. Questions come up, concerns change, and it also helps to guard against isolation, especially during this vulnerable time. And then to train social workers, we've heard some ideas today on how to address issues and barriers that may hold children back from saying yes to adoption. And that's really important, so that they can get beneath the know and understand why. Once we understand, we know how to move forward, or hopefully at least we have more information and moving forward.
So we have a great question that came in for Brandon. It says, Brandon, what do you wish your workers had done differently or better for you? Brandon, can you answer that?
Yeah, I think that still goes back to communication. I did have several workers that there were topics or you know questions that they had or concerns that they didn't really come to me about or ask me about just because they maybe thought that I was fragile or that I couldn't really handle the things that they had to say because of the situation that I was in. And there was a time when I was in an adoptive home that I thought was going great, and I thought that I was going to be adopted, and then that process had already started, and then it turns out several weeks later, by me just being nosy, I came across some emails that my adoptive and foster mother at the time was sending to the social worker, just asking, questions and needing support and saying that she didn't really know that she didn't think that this was going to work. And at the time, that was heartbreaking, not so much because, the placement was going to fall through, but because no one really shared that with me. No one came to me and said, hey, we're on email 295 now about this lady that doesn't really want to adopt you. And it wasn't the falling through of the adoption itself, it was the fact that my worker didn't come to me and address these issues with me and allow me to change the actions that were that this family was having a hard time with, and B, allow me to see that, this placement falling through was up ahead, and to prepare myself for the fact that I'm not going to be adopted this time. So it really does boil down to communication again, just not beating around the bush with the child that you're, in charge of because you feel that they, may not be stable or that they may not be able to, comprehend or, fix the things that you have to tell them, but just giving them a chance to talk to you about that and have their voice and to let it be heard, and, for the social workers and, workers that are involved with these kids to use their voice and to really, have a conversation with them about the hard stuff that that's hard to talk about. So.
Thank you, Brandon. It's great to be able to hear from a foster care alum, your experience, your perspective, to bring that voice to the table, and just, reminding all of us to ask our youth what we can do to best support them, and then keep that in mind when we sometimes get so busy trying to move on with other things that we got to do. Other questions you guys are continuing to type in the chat box, we are definitely tracking those, and we're going to move to that in just a minute. We'll have an opportunity to do some question and answer. Here's one right now you might be able to address, Brandon, while you are. It says, what age were you adopted, or when an adoption fell through? Let's see.
I was 15 at the time. And so I also see, because some children cannot handle that information right away. That's true. You do really have to, take into, consideration who specifically, the child is that you're working with and how they can take information. I was mentally stable at the time, and, I was able to communicate well, so, I think maybe that's why I took offense to the worker not wanting to really talk to me about it. But, if a worker is dealing with someone that they don't think can handle the information, that really is just a point where you have to wonder, okay, when do I need to talk to them about it? Because, talking with them about it and maybe getting a response that you don't necessarily like is a lot better for the child than, packing all their things and having it in the back of the car and picking them up from school and saying, hey, that placement didn't really work out. We're going to take you to another one. So, it may be a hard conversation to have with some kids, but, you got to pick a point where communication and letting them know, what's really going on is more important than them just being in the dark about things and being surprised when, their situation and it changes.
There's one more question coming in right now, talking about suggestions for communication for those of us that may not be able to handle. I guess they're maybe not ready to hear what you have to say. Any suggestions with communicating with workers?
Considering it's just communication, may not be able to handle it. Again, I mean, that's just, you're going to have to take into account, who your child is specifically and what problems they may have, and, what issues they may have with you communicating with them and telling them things that they don't want to hear. But, I think that the biggest thing about communication is just having their feelings in mind. And if you just start out the conversation that way and say, I hate to tell you this, and I don't know how you're going to take it, but I just want to have a conversation with you and let you know what's going on, and just be very upfront, and then just let them know that any reaction that they have, or any thing that they want to say to this situation, it's okay to have those feelings, and it's okay to say what they want to say, and it's okay to even break down, but you're there for them, and you're their worker, and that's what you're there to do, and that, just provide constant support, and, not only communicate the bad news, but communicate, let it be strength-based. Talk about how wonderful they are and how good they're doing, in school, and, really just talk about their strengths, and, let them know that they do have people, and, to support them, and then, go into the things that you may not really want to talk about with them. So
I'd like to add something to that. This is Diane.
Thanks, Diane.
I think one of the things I've learned is that, if you have a talk ahead with these young people, with these kids, you're going to know them. And the questions I ask, is getting into it. How much do you want to know? And so that it's not a surprise, and you're not trying to guess whether or not this is information they want to hear or whether they don't want to hear. If you have a game plan set up ahead with this young person, one thing I've learned is that a lot of these kids, it's anxious making when you don't know what's going on. And some kids would prefer not to know what's going on. But if you know that ahead of time, then it takes some of the guesswork out of how much information do I deliver to them. Trust is a big issue. And as you know, these young people are so used to being left. And if they're left in the dark, that doesn't do anything to build trust either. So my suggestion is, and the kids I've worked with over the years, I get to know them ahead of time. I mean, I know them, and we ask questions. There's going to be adoption recruitment events we're going to go to. Do you want to know the outcomes of those events, so that we can gauge ahead of time what level of information we're going to give to each of these young people.
And Diane, I'll add on to that as well. I'm seeing in the comments that someone said, something about maybe addressing, those issues with their therapist, or, or a supportive adult. And I think that that's great as well. I mean, it doesn't always have to fall onto the social worker to deliver bad news or talk about things that, the child doesn't really want to hear about. I mean, this is why there needs to be mentors and therapists and, people in, authoritative role that, are supportive for that youth. And that way, it's someone that they are a little bit closer to, that they see a little bit more often. But that's a great suggestion. If a worker, if you just feel like it's just going to be like pulling teeth with, a child, or really, really hurting them to tell them something, don't let it always, fall on the worker. I mean, you're there to support them, and, to translate some of that information to their foster parents or their therapists. And those mentors and therapists and older people are great things to use, and to let them speak to the youth as well about these things, and to really just, I mean, it takes a village to raise a child, and to really just use all those people, as much as you can.
Some great questions and a great dialogue coming on now. I'm glad you guys are typing in your questions, because you have an opportunity to hear from Brandon and Diane about some strategies that they've used that have been successful. And here's another one here. Of course, you've got props, Brandon, where people are saying, yes, you need to be doing some training. Hence why you're probably now working with Under One Sky too and really helping other youth.
Yes.
But, you know, just to let everybody know that's participating, we're capturing these questions and answers. And again, we have a follow-up document that we prepare. So if there's something that you might have missed that he said, we'll include it within our follow-up document. Diane, there's a question for you. What age would you start talking with a child about adoption? I often hear that workers aren't talking with kids about adoption because they think they're too young to understand. Can you address that?
Yes, thank you. I think it depends not so much on the age as it does the emotional stability and ability of the child to understand what's really going on. The word adoption is such a buzzword, and oftentimes, you know, it's something that can scare kids because there are so many misconceptions about being adopted, and especially when, you know, we work with older kids. Most of the kids we work with are school age. They're 7 to 17 years old. So I would start talking about what their hopes and dreams are as early as you think they're able to comprehend. And some of the young people who are 8, 9, and 10 are very capable of understanding what permanency means or what it means to be to go into a forever family. So I think it mostly depends on the emotional stability of the young person and their mental ability to understand and comprehend what this means. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Diane. We do have one more here I'm seeing in the queue. Is for any of our presenters, perhaps, does anyone have suggestions for how their agency has helped foster care workers who don't feel comfortable talking about adoption, even when it's a primary or secondary plan because they figure that's the adoption worker's job, even though that's not the agency expectation? Do we have any presenters that might have some ideas?
This is Bobbette. We actually had the foster care social workers attend the Darla Henry 357 model training to gain the skill set and tools to help feel more comfortable speaking with our youth about adoption. We do know that a lot of foster care workers are reluctant, especially with the concurrent goal planning. They're not sure if adoption will remain the concurrent goal, but we are offering support to the foster care social workers through the training, and they can also attend the consultation that we do with the 357 model to gather skills, support, and direction on how to have that conversation with the youth.
Thank you very much, Bobbette. I think that's all the questions we have for now, but please continue to type them in the chat box as I just show you the resources here, because some of you have talked about this information too, of how you can have access to comments, suggestions, strategies. Well, this is just a snapshot of the resources available in your handout, and a lot of the information in the presentation today is supported with these handouts. So certainly take the time to review them when you get a chance. So let's just give another moment here at this point for you guys to type any other questions you have for our presenters. We'll wait online for a few minutes before we move on to wrapping up our webinar for the morning. So please type in any questions that you have.
Darla Henry does a contract for her 2-day training, a 1-day follow-up training, and the monthly consultation. Your agency would need to speak with her to get the cost in that.
Speaking of cost, this is Diane. I just wanted to mention that not all our camps are the price that I mentioned before. Junior Journey Camp is $2,100 for the year, which includes all the camp-based programs and adoption support group and supportive services between camp programs. And our Total Life conferences is $1,800 for the year, and that is also multiple times throughout the year. Oh, Rick is prompting me about, I'm not sure what, but well, adoption incentive monies. Some counties use their adoption incentive money to pay for Junior Journey and Journey Camp because this is adoption preparation. And the Total Life conferences, some of the counties use links monies if they're not on adoption track. And some of these young people at age 15 to 18 are still on, well, 17 are on adoption track. So sometimes they can even use both pools of money to send their young people to these programs. Thank you.
We do still have a couple more minutes if you guys want to type in any other questions in the chat box.
There is a question, can an undocumented immigrant adopt a child if the child prefers that the person adopt him or her? Yes, in North Carolina, I believe this is state, it's specified by state, but adoption, undocumented does not stop an adoption. I do think they have to show residency, but, I don't think it stops. I can certainly follow up and just double check on that, and we can put it in the answers on the sheet that'll go out. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it doesn't stop it.
Yeah, we can certainly include an answer or any more information in the follow-up document. Looks like folks are sharing their own experience with working with undocumented folks, and again, I think maybe we'll just make sure we include that in the follow-up document so we get some clarity. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any more questions in the queue. Certainly have one that we might be able to quickly answer. Type that in the box, but I'm going to move us forward to some more information here. So here are just a few additional resources that some of our handouts came from. The Treat Them Like Gold Guide provides many specific strategies that have been proven effective in North Carolina for recruiting and retaining resource families. In fact, a whole chapter of it is dedicated to child-specific recruitment, so check it out if you guys haven't already seen that resource. The Child Welfare Information Gateway is sponsored by the U.S. Children's Bureau. It's a rich source of information on all topics related to child welfare, including adoption, but they have a lot more. They have a pretty good search function, too, if you want to go there to their website and just look for anything in particular. NC Kids, of course, we heard from Mary today at NC Kids. Focuses on finding families for children in North Carolina and accomplishes this by registering waiting children and adoptive families. They do some of that preliminary matching as well at NC Kids, so go to their website for more information about NC Kids. And last but not least, Fostering Perspectives. that offers a lot of information and practice tips to child welfare professionals, foster parents, adoptive parents. So check out that website. Get on the publication list, that email list, if you haven't already, so that you can get fostering perspectives. All right, so Mary has one more thing to ask of you guys before I move on to closing out this webinar. I'll let Mary jump.
Okay. If everyone could just take a minute and type in the chat one thing that you took away from today's training or webinar, whether it was something you learned new, something that you feel like you can start implementing within your agency, just something that you were able to take away from today. Oh. Okay, look into One Sky for one of my children. More resources out there that we can tap into. The Adoption Readiness Camp. Different options for older youth and teens. Let the youth lead their process for adoption. That's excellent. Having youth more involved, attending the conference, being more open with communication with children about what is going on with their adoption, absolutely. Youth-driven recruitment, starting a group for our youth who are free for adoption. Brandon's firsthand experience validates how important it is to listen to youth and let them be part of the adoption process. Adoption conference, looking into it and the resources. Great. These are all great.
Thank you all for typing in the chat box. We're always glad to hear of something that you learned today that you really appreciated. Of course, in a moment we'll tell you how you can also provide that in a survey form too. One other note that reminded me of, there were still folks that were loving the adoption conference availability and openness that Mecklenburg DSS organizes. We'll try and include some information in the follow-up document about that if we can, as far as when registration might be open. And certainly you have, let me click on it, Bobbette's contact information right there too. She said she would be happy to answer questions directly if you want to email her. But again, we'll try and include some information in the follow-up document of when the registration might be open, or at least where to look to register when it's available. But certainly here are the other presenters' contact information as well, if you guys do want to follow up with a question or a thank you note to them. It is also in your handouts.